And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather again, our first today's sea ice analysis showing ice continuing to slowly form here along all of the Arctic coast, well, about from Point Lay eastward to Mackenzie Bay up here. Also some pretty good ice forming in Kotzebue Sound and down in Norton Bay. This pattern will probably continue for the next several days. And now for tonight's weather again, low pressure pulling back, weakening considerably, pulling moisture westward once again. So probably look for some rain to move into Prince William Sound. And across the Copper River Basin, some areas of light snow, but improving considerably here over the southeast coast as this next system tracks almost due eastward, heading toward Vancouver Island. And for the day tomorrow, low pressure continues to slowly weaken here in the Gulf of Alaska, but that easterly flow on the north side continue to pull moisture westward, at least some precipitation into the Manuska Valley, maybe northern Cook Inlet, Anchorage actually the cutoff there, and areas of snow in the central interior and a widespread area of light snow all the way up across the North Slope Brooks Range, eastern Arctic coast, but starting to dry out now over the eastern interior, and could see some clearing down over the southern Panhandle tomorrow afternoon. Bering Sea, not much change out here, but the next day, here comes a big storm force low into the western Aleutians here. Very tight gradient with that. So again, 60-knot winds in the forecast with gale force winds pushing to Atka in the afternoon. Fair over the southwest interior. Snow showers with that weak system up to the northwest and along the Arctic coast, but dry over the remainder of interior Alaska all the way down to Kodiak Island. And this low pressure area now becoming a non-factor as it continues to slowly weaken in place, dry across the southeast coast with maybe some partly sunny skies in some areas. And for the coastal water forecast, east winds 15 to 20 knots on the south coast, east-southeast at 10 tomorrow. So much lighter than what you saw today. Southeast 10 knots for the north coast, south winds 10 knots, Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay east at 10 for Stevens Passage. And north winds 15 knots with seas down to 3 feet for Clarence Strait. And then for the Wednesday outlook, variable winds 5 to 10 knots for the north coast. Northwest winds at about 10 to 15 knots for the central and south coast. Light variable winds over the inside waters about sums it up with seas around 2 feet. And for Prince William Sound for Tuesday, east winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. East-southeast winds 20 knots with 7-foot seas for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Western North Gulf Coast, north winds at 20 knots. And good gales for the Barren Islands of Kamishak Bay tomorrow. West winds 45 knots for Kamishak Bay, northwest at 40. For the Barren Islands, Cook Inlet, north to northeast, 10 to 15 knots. North winds 10 knots for Wednesday for Cook Inlet. Kamishak Bay, Barren Islands, winds out of the northwest at 30 knots. Northeast at 10 for Prince William Sound. East winds 20 knots for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Kodiak Island, northwest winds 30 to 35 knots with gusts of 50 knots. And northwest 15 to 20 knot winds to the Alaska Peninsula. Bristol Bay, northwest at 20 knots with 6-foot seas. Wednesday, Kodiak Island, north to northwest winds 20 knots. Northwest winds 15 knots for the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay, northeast at 15. Tomorrow for the western Aleutians, southwest 25 to 30 knots there west of Kiska to Shimia. Otherwise, light variable winds in across Adak and Atka under high pressure with seas down to 4 feet. Light northwest winds of 15 knots for the Fox Islands. And then for Wednesday, that big storm comes in, and actually you've got storm force winds late in the day developing here all the way east to Atka Island from the south, 50 to 55 knots. Call it 50 knots for Atka Island, 55 knots for Adak. And then east-southeast, 55 to 60 knots there for the western Aleutians with seas building up above, 20 to 27 feet. And the eastern Aleutians here, gales approaching Nikolsky late in the day, southwest or west-southwest 20 for Unalaska Island. For the southwest coast tomorrow, northwest winds 15 knots, northwest at 15 for Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island as well, north 15 for the St. Matthew Island area, northwest 15 for the Pribilofs. And for Wednesday, south winds 20 knots for the Pribilofs, southeast 25, St. Matthew Island, light winds here along the southwest coast, out of the west at 10 to 15 knots, seas down to 2 to 3 feet, west of 20 for St. Lawrence Island, and small craft advisories for Norton Sound, west winds 25 knots. And we've got small craft advisories all along the Arctic coast tomorrow, all out of the northeast, 25 to 30 knots, with seas 7 to 8 feet or 6 to 8 feet here. And then the Chukchi Sea, north to northeast, 20 to 25 knots. And then for Wednesday, winds lightening up here on the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, out of the northeast, 10 to 20 knots, east-northeast, 25 knots for the central and western Arctic coast. And then the Chukchi Sea, east to north winds at about 15 knots with seas 3 to 4 feet.